is in the meeting with us. We will be doing some introductions here in a few minutes, so get ready to just unmute yourself and introduce yourself. I'm just gonna say a few opening remarks here before we get started, just to orient you to our meeting today. And I hope that you've had a chance to review the agenda package that Karen sent out that is posted on TRPA's new website with a .gov at the end instead of a .org. And I just want to remind folks that have been participating and let folks that are new to our process, because I know we have some new folks today, which is great, that our overarching goal for this meeting and for all these meetings is to look at TRPA's policies and make modifications and enhancements where we can to try to achieve workforce housing needs that have been identified by the California Regional Housing Needs Assessment and the South Shore and Placer County Needs Assessments and other basin planning efforts that have been done in Tahoe. So on to today, we will be hearing briefly from some utility districts on programs they have in place to help with workforce and affordable housing. After that, you're going to hear staff from TRPA present on draft code amendments for your confirmation based on consensus items from our February 10th, 2021 meeting, which was our last working group meeting. If you'll recall, we identified 2 areas of consensus in the basic ADU package that we're ready to move into code or policy development. So you'll be hearing about those today. And you'll also be hearing about 2 areas of consensus that we discussed on density and distribution of development. I think you'll see TRPA is making some meaningful strides in these categories to try to simplify processes and encourage this development. I do know that some of you are going to want to see more happen faster, but I'm just going to ask you to try to focus on the process and what we have today before us. And remember that we do have midterm and long-term goals ahead of us to discuss with this group, to look at other categories and further enhancements to streamline and build, hopefully, affordable housing. After that, we're going to hear about code cleanup items related to the Development Rights Strategic Initiative. And those are mostly going to focus on potentially shifting some of TRPA's bonus units from the moderate achievable pool over to the affordable pool. And then finally, staff will update the working group and ask for input on priority actions that we discussed at prior meetings. And those are 4 updates that we're going to hear about. I'll just summarize them quickly. It's a bonus unit incentive program, shifting achievable to include affordable, moderate, and workforce in the definition. We'll talk about density, ADU incentives, and then priorities and timelines. And in the density discussion, I think you're going to hear an insightful new analysis that TRPA is working on that's focused on what type of development our current rules are incentivizing. I think it's going to bring some light to our discussion on how our different standards like coverage, height, density, et cetera, interact currently and how we can think about modifying them to help create the type of development that we want to see. And so with that, I'm really looking forward to a robust discussion today. I want to encourage members of the public to participate along with working group members. Please feel free at the appropriate times to raise your hand if you'd like to speak, and I'll call on you. And please use the chat function sparingly. The chat will just go to the hosts of the meeting, so you can feel free to send a chat if you'd like to send me or Karen or Alyssa anything. Mostly noting that you would like to speak. We'd like to hear comments vocalized at this meeting. So with that, I'm going to turn this, let's see, the next slide I think we can go to. Again, I think I'm just going to ask you to please mute yourself. And if you'd like to turn your camera on when you're speaking, that would be just fine. It's not absolutely necessary, but I think I summarized these. Please use the hand raising function and I'll call on you to speak. And then the next slide, I think, is our agenda, which I just summarized. We'll hear partner highlights and then basic code package, density development envelopes. We'll look at the bonus unit program, and then you'll hear about updates and next steps. And so I think we can go to updates next, or intros. So let's see, I'm trying to think about the best way to do this. We have 36 participants. I'd like to hear from working group members first, but I don't know that I can keep all that straight. So can I just go down my list, Karen, and have folks introduce themselves quickly? You think that's okay?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, so why don't you go ahead, Karen?
Oh, thanks. Thanks for the introduction, Brendan, to Karen Fink, TRPA's Housing Program Manager.
And how about Alyssa?
Hi, everyone. Alyssa Bettinger, an associate planner on TRPA's long range planning team.
Ronald Yank?
Yes. I'm here.
All right. Welcome.
Thank you.
Good to have you. How about Alex Marin? Okay, I don't see you unmuted, Alex. I'm going to move on to Amanda Johnson with the California AG's office.
Hi, yes. I'm Amanda with the California AG's office. I'm here at a staff level, and I'm just interested in what's being proposed and discussed.
Thanks for being with us. Bill Martinez.
Good morning. I'm Bill Martinez, Executive Director of the South Lake Tahoe Family Resource Center.
Hey, Bill. How about Blake Tresson?
Hi, thanks for inviting me. Blake Treson, General Manager of the Truckee Sanitary District.
Morning. Brandy
Morning.
Brown.
Hi, I'm Brandy Brown and I live in Tahoe. I like it here.
All right, me too. CJ Freeland.
Good morning. Hi, Brendan. I'm CJ Freeland. I'm with El Dorado County's Housing, Community, and Economic Development Programs.
Great. Casey Byer.
Good morning, Casey Byer, California Governor appointee to the TRPA board.
Thanks, Casey. Chase Janbrin.
Morning, thanks, Brandon. I'm Chase Janbrin, Program Manager for the Tahoe Prosperity Center.
Hey, Chase. How about Supervisor Gustafson?
Good morning, I'm Cindy Gustafson. I'm Placer County Supervisor and also serve on the California Tahoe Conservancy Board and TRPA Governing Board. Thank you.
Thanks, Cindy. Edward Kearney.
Yeah, this is Edward Kearney, the homeowner in the Tahoe Basin. Thanks.
Good morning. How about Elizabeth Ballman?
Hi, good morning. This is Elizabeth Ballman with Sierra Community House, which is the consolidation of the former Family Resource Center of Truckee, North Tahoe Family Resource Center, Tahoe Safe Alliance, and Project Mona.
Thanks for being with us. Eric Young, Washoe County.
Morning, everyone. I'm Eric Young with Washoe County Planning Program, and I'm on the TRPA Advisory Planning Commission.
Thanks, Eric. Heather Lunsford.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Heather Lunsford with Carrera, Nevada, and we represent the Incline Village Realtors and the Sierra Nevada Realtors.
Hey, Heather. How about Emily Setzer?
Hi there, I'm Emily Setzer. I work for Placer County in the Community Development Resource Agency in Tahoe City.
Thanks, Emily. Gene Diaz.
Good morning, Gene Diaz, Executive Director, St. Joseph Community Land Trust.
Morning, Gene. Let's see, Jessica Henderson.
Good morning, I'm Jessica Henderson and I am a representative for South Tahoe Public Utility District.
Thank you. How about Jessica Wackenhut?
Good morning, everyone. Jessica Wackenhut Lomeli, Tahoe Strategic Growth Manager with Strategic Growth Council and Tahoe Conservancy.
Good morning. Joanne Marquetta.
Good morning, everybody. I'm TRPA's Executive Director. I'll be in and out of this meeting today, multitasking. Thank you.
Thanks, Joanne. John Falk.
Hello. I'm going to be switching over to my computer momentarily. John Falk, I'm the Legislative Advocate for the Tahoe Board of Realtors.
Thanks, John. John Friedrich.
The other John F.
The
Good
other
morning,
John F.
John Friedrich, South Lake Tahoe City Council member, also serve on the TRPA Governing Board.
Thanks, John. Lydia Altick. Okay, I'm going to move on. Good morning, Lydia. Mia Kang.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Mia Kang with Related California Senior Vice President, Affordable Housing Developer, building workforce housing around the lake.
Thanks, Mia. Melanie Shasha.
Hi, this is Melanie Shasha. I work at the El Dorado County Planning Department.
Hey, Melanie. Natalie Yanish.
Hello, Natalie Yanish, the Government Affairs Manager for the Contractors Association of Truckee Tahoe.
Thanks, Natalie. Nicole Zaborski.
Nicole Zaborski. I'm the accessory dwelling unit coordinator for the South Tahoe Association of Realtors, and also I'm a board member for the Tahoe Coalition for the Homeless.
Thanks, Nicole. Sam Booth.
Good morning, Sam Booth with Douglas County Community Development and TRPA APC member.
Sam. Supervisor Novacell.
Good morning, everyone. Sue Novacell, El Dorado County Supervisor, District 5, and TRPA appointed member and CTC chair and chair of the TRPA Local Housing, Government and Housing Group.
Thanks, Sue. Suzanne Hoy.
Hi, I'm Susan Hoy, and I'm a local Tahoe resident and been long time interested in the housing issues up here. So just sitting in. Thank you.
Thanks, Susan. Tara Zerrato.
Hi, everyone. Tara Zawardo with the Mountain Housing Council. Good morning.
Good morning. And Zach Thomas.
Hey, everyone. Good to be here. Zach Thomas, Housing Manager for the City of South Lake Tahoe.
Thanks, Zach. Let's see. Is there anyone I missed? Go ahead and unmute and introduce yourself, please.
I'm John Hester, known as Karen Fink, COO at TRPA, and I'm going to log off and try to log back on as myself because I can't figure out how to change my name.
All right.
Actually, for anybody whose name came up as Karen Fink or any other name, you can just go to the three dots under More on your screen, and there should be an option that says Rename. That's probably the best way to change your name.
Thank you. I did not call on all those Karen Finks.
And good morning. This is Karen Fink Jr. going as John Marshall, TRPA General Counsel.
Good morning, Johns. Always good to have you with us. And thank you all for taking the time to do that. I think it's important just to see the diversity of folks in this meeting and the skill set that we have around our table. So that's great. I think we can go to the next slide, and I'm going to turn this over to Karen to introduce our public utility districts.
Great, thanks. Actually, Alyssa, you could go to the next slide too. Yeah, thanks everybody for joining us today. And we're really appreciative to our two presenters that are going to kick off the meeting today. We're excited to hear from Jessica Henderson. She introduced herself. She's the customer service specialist from the South Tahoe Public Utility District. And Jessica is going to tell us about a new program at STPUD to bank, map, and transfer sewer units for use for affordable housing. And then we're also going to hear from Blake Treson from the general manager from Truckee Sanitary District. And he's going to talk about some recent changes to that district's fee structure. And then I also wanted to mention that I checked in with Sean Barkley, the general manager of Tahoe City Public Utility District as well. And he couldn't make it today, but he just wanted to convey that the TCPUD is an active funding partner of the Mountain Housing Council. And so far, the changes to the fees at TCPUD have not really come up as a priority item because TCPUD has some of the lowest connection fees in the region, apparently at $1,000 per unit. So I just said I would pass that on his behalf. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Jessica to give us a quick update on STPUD. And Jessica, let us know if you need anything.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me here today. The Board of Directors has recently just passed a new ordinance to hopefully help with some of the affordable housing projects that are wanting to get up and going. So originally, sewer units used to be required to remain on a parcel once purchased for that parcel. A sewer unit is actually considered to be a kitchen sink or a bathroom. And so if a project was being built and someone decided to pay for 3 toilets and 1 kitchen, they would have 4 sewer units. If at any point in time they decided to cut back on that, maybe only adding 2 sewer units, that 1 extra sewer unit would actually have to remain on the property. What our board has recently done is they have come up with an ordinance that will allow those property owners to transfer that excess sewer unit to a project for affordable housing. And then in addition to that, they are now allowing public agencies to transfer excess sewer units between one another. So the most recent example we have of this is with the Boys and Girls Club project. The city of South Lake Tahoe and the school district got together and they have transferred some of their excess sewer units to the Boys and Girls Club, cutting down on those sewer connection fees that are required. Currently, we have over 3,000 sewer units in excess, and staff is in the process of reaching out to customers to see who is willing to donate those. And in order to get a tax credit for that, we have to work with a nonprofit foundation. So we are in the process of working with El Dorado Community Foundation, and that will allow those who donate those sewer units to receive a tax break. Are there any questions on any of the new ordinances or sewer unit policies?
I just have a quick question. Thank you, Jessica. That was really interesting. Will there be any kind of, once people have agreed to, if they're a private customer and they're willing to make their unit available, will there be a database that people will be able to access, or how can they find those units?
So for the time being, we are reaching out to anyone who has 1 or more sewer units in excess, looking at our database, which is just our billing database and reports we have showing them in excess. We have customers who have anywhere from 1 sewer unit in excess to over 100. So we are going through a process, going through our reports, reaching out to all of those customers individually. And then we are going to be keeping reports on those who are willing to transfer. And a lot of that will be done through that El Dorado Community Foundation.
Great, thank you. Are there any other questions for Jessica? Doesn't look like it. Okay, thank you very much, Jessica. Now let's go to Blake Treson. And Blake, I know you wanted to share your screen, and I think Alyssa's going to give you screen share privileges.
Great, let's see here. Thanks everybody. I'll try and make this quick as possible. Can you see the slide?
Yep, I can see it.
Okay, so TSD, I'm going to share with you a recent process we've gone through regarding setting our residential sewer connection fees. And so you guys probably know where Truckee is, but TSD is the agency responsible for wastewater collection in the Truckee area. We've been around a long time, have around 16,000 customers, a lot of growth. We suffering the same issues as far as lack of achievable affordable housing up here. Our operating revenues come from our annual user fees and property taxes, and we fund capacity expanding capital projects through connection fees. That way growth pays for growth. And it was this cap connection fee that we were reviewing. So our connection fees are a one-time charge to a customer at the time they connect. And those funds are restricted solely for capacity-related capital infrastructure projects. These are one of many fees that new construction projects are faced with. And so our current flat rate of $750 per equivalent dwelling unit was set in 1983. And in 2019, we went through the process of doing a hydraulic model to determine what future capacity needs we had, and found that, in fact, we had roughly $20 million in anticipated capacity-related improvements for us to expand the system for build out, and that 20 million needed to be shared amongst the 12,000 potential future equivalent dwelling units that we might see at build out. We, in 2020, retained a consultant to help us assess the adequacy of our connection fee, and they came up with the conclusion that we really needed to change our $750 fee that had been around for 38 years to $1,440 per EDU. So we've got commercial and we've got residential customers. I won't go into the commercial fees because I think really what the topic you guys are looking at is the residential rates. And so we looked at three options. Option one was continuing our past practice of having a flat rate of $1,440 per residential unit. There's sort of a mantra in our agency: a house is a house is a house. They all should behave the same rate. We also explored option two, which was a tiered rate where single family units would pay that full rate, and residential units associated with multifamily units would pay slightly less. And then option three was this scalable rate based on the size of the unit. And so the board deliberated on this. We received public comments from the Mountain Housing Council, Contractors Association, and some of the developers in the area. All of them provided comments supporting a scalable size-based rate. The challenge was finding a nexus between the size of the structure and its potential peak flow. This is complicated in our area by occupancy patterns. Many of the smaller units are full-time occupied, whereas many of the larger units are often unoccupied. And so it was challenging to come up with a clean nexus on that. I think flat rate was challenging. There is a difference between houses, but a purely scalable rate probably wasn't equitable. In other words, does a 6,000 square foot home really produce 6 times the amount of wastewater of a 1,000 foot unit? And so we came up with this concept of really it's something in between a base fee plus a scalable rate. This is data on all the homes in Truckee that we currently serve through the assessor's office. The size of the units from 1,000 square feet, 2,000, 3,000, and a combination of bedrooms and bathrooms in the unit. So there clearly is a house is not a house. As you get larger homes, the scatter plot shows that you tend to generally have more bedrooms and bathrooms, which therefore has the likelihood of producing more wastewater. The average residential unit in our service area is 2,000 square feet. And so we actually looked at the whole spectrum. This brown line represents the flat rate, that 1440, regardless of the size of the unit. So this, again, the size of the residential unit is along the bottom axis, and their potential connection fee is on the y-axis. And so a flat rate is this one on the bottom, or this brown line here. And then a purely scalable rate is the blue line. That would be, for every square foot you pay extra there. And then really it was a whole spectrum of possibilities between that. A number of folks petitioned and said they thought a 50% base rate and then scalable from there was equitable. Our board deliberated. on it and selected an 80% base rate and 20% variable. So $1,100 base plus 14 cents per square foot, with those costs being escalated annually for increases in construction costs, and that we should review these fees on a 5 to 10 year basis instead of a 37-year basis to account for changes in land use, flow characteristics changes, and construction costs. So it was a step in the way. Again, there was discussion about trying to set our connection fees to support affordable housing from a number of the people who submitted comments, but the connection fee is really a reflection of flow. And so we were really struggling to balance, possible desire to support affordable housing with the reality that that fee legally has to have a nexus with flow. And I thought that the final decision the board came up with was a reasonable compromise. There's other mechanisms similar to what you just heard from South Tahoe that we may look at for trying to support affordable housing at our agency, but from a connection fee standpoint, we think we took a step in that direction. I don't think it moves the needle really far for a potential developer of affordable housing to rush to Truckee now because the sewer agency has got this 80% base rate plus variable as opposed to our previous flat fee, but it moves the needle a little bit. Glad to answer any questions.
Thanks, Blake.
Sure.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Yes.
Did you guys look at other utilities and even other types of services to see if there's sort of a standard practice for per square foot fees? Because I don't want to jump the gun on one of our later discussions, but if we do look at square footage, some of our fees are per unit, and we would have to figure out a way to switch them to per square foot.
It's a good question, John. It really depends on the service being provided and the potential impact of an increased house size has on that service being provided. I didn't do a comprehensive survey, but I know that a number of other public agencies have just a pure square foot rate, no base plus square foot. And then similar to, I think Karen mentioned, Tahoe City PUD still has a flat rate. Flat rates for sewers are still the industry norm, that it doesn't matter the size of your unit. A residential unit is charged the same connection fee. And so this is still fairly new for our industry to move to a scalable rate, but I think it's something that will gain momentum, particularly with the lack of affordable housing.
Great, thanks. Are there any more questions for Blake or for Jessica?
Hey, Karen, this is Chase Janvin. I've got a question for Blake.
Sure.
Blake, what do you see the impacts of this being on multifamily developments, in particular affordable housing?
Chase, it's a very small, like I said, if you look at the Mountain Housing Council's report, the total combination of all kind of fees, not the construction costs, but just the front up fees, are by themselves a relatively small amount of the total construction cost. And Terry, you might be able to jump in, but I want to say something on the order of 20% of the total construction cost of those fees. Our sewer fee is very small compared to, say, the town and the school district and other public agencies. And for us to then move ours from a flat rate to this slightly scalable one, again, I don't think it moves the needle a little bit, but I don't think it's really going to drive affordable housing projects into Truckee because TSD has got it. But again, it moved the needle a little bit, but not a whole lot. I don't know, the housing development community even going to notice it.
But even if it doesn't make that big of an impact, I still applaud your position in taking a leadership role in this. And I think if all of the various agencies that are incorporated into those soft costs and fees, if all of them had a sliding scale, then I think we might see people being forced to make some value decisions on affordable housing and density developments as opposed to single family. So good job.
Well, thank you.
Great, thanks. Well, thanks to you both, Jessica and Blake. It's really great for us to hear about other changes that other partners are making related to affordable housing. So we really appreciate your time. And as Chase and John were alluding to, a lot of these creative concepts that you guys are talking about could potentially apply to some of the actions that we're going to be looking at as a group or potentially as individual entities later on. So thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Good luck with the rest of your meeting. I'm signing off. Bye.
Bye. All right, yeah. Thanks, Jessica. Great, shall we go on to the next slide? Okay, great. So now we're gonna get into our first agenda item. And also one thing, we had it on the slide, but we didn't announce it. We are recording this meeting, just so everybody's aware of that. So now we're gonna talk about our first agenda item. And we're going to go over, as Brendan mentioned, the consensus items that came out of the February Tahoe Living Working Group meeting. And we crafted some code changes related to what we heard at the last meeting, where we heard there was broad consensus on the two near-term priority actions that were ADUs and density. So at that last meeting, we started talking about ADUs and density and some changes related to those two things that will really support our regional plan goals of encouraging more sufficient workforce housing in close proximity to town centers and transit, and also that will help our local jurisdictions meet their housing needs requirements. So as we go through this, you'll see how all of these recommendations, there's 3 recommendations, are really structured around incentivizing that type of walkable development. We also want to acknowledge that this package doesn't include everything that we heard from the working group that we wanted to look at related to ADUs. However, some of the other things that came up, particularly related to coverage, we think actually blend really nicely into some later specific action items that the group identified. So what we want to focus on now is where we have consensus support. And if we can keep some of our momentum going, we'll be able to continue to look at other incentives in later action items. And we can make sure that we're really crafting those incentives to make sure that they're supporting regional plan goals and helping meet that local housing need. So each of these 3 proposals kind of fit together. So I'm going to go through all of them first. I'm not going to get into the actual code language, but I hope that you guys have all had a chance to review the staff report that we sent out, and you can refer to the actual language, as we're going through this on your own screens. So let's talk first. Let's go to the next slide. So now we're going to talk about the changes that we've proposed for accessory dwelling units, also known as ADUs. So our existing code related to ADUs really doesn't actually encourage this workforce housing type in areas that are walkable. So our code right now only allows for accessory dwelling units on parcels of greater than 1 acre in size. And most single family parcels of that size are not in fact close to town centers or walkable areas. They're more on the outskirts. So this proposed change, in particular as a package with the proposed modifications to the bonus unit boundary that you're going to hear about a few slides subsequent, really encourages ADUs close to transit, town centers, and walkable areas. So now let's go to the next slide. Okay, so I know that by now you're all pretty familiar with our current ADU regulations, but I'm just going to quickly go over them. So right now, ADUs are only allowed on parcels of 1 acre or greater at the regional level. Where they are allowed, we only allow 1 per parcel. Let's see, unlike other single family uses, because accessory dwelling units are really the exception to the rule, when someone wants to add on an accessory dwelling unit, they need to provide notice to their neighbors. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, so these are the proposed changes that we heard consensus on at the last meeting. So what we're proposing now is really part of the effort to reduce the disparity between how easy it is to build larger homes that are likely to become second homes versus how hard it is to build smaller workforce housing types. So the first proposal is to lift that 1 acre parcel size limit so that ADUs would be allowed on any residential parcel. Then as far as the number, we actually didn't talk about this at the last working group meeting, but in order to help the California jurisdictions stay in compliance with California's ADU law, we are proposing that up to 2 accessory dwelling units would be allowed per parcel. The California law allows for 1 detached ADU and 1 junior ADU per parcel. And then because ADUs would be an allowed use on all residential parcels, just like other accessory uses or expansions of single family homes, like adding a garage or an additional bedroom, they wouldn't require special noticing to neighbors. So next slide, please. Okay, so I want to talk really specifically about how this proposal relates to our development rights and coverage regulations, because these were 2 issues that really came up as part of the discussion about incentives for ADUs with the Tahoe Living Working Group. And then also these there were quite a few questions on both of these topics asked during the ADU webinar that TRPA and the local jurisdictions put on March 31st. So first, I want to talk about coverage. So coverage is really an environmental issue. It's focused on stopping erosion and runoff from going into the lake to maintain water quality. It's not tied to accessory dwelling units per se. Initially, we had kind of left the door open that maybe we could look at coverage incentives related to ADUs, but there wasn't consensus on this at the last meeting based on some of the questions that we asked through a survey of the working group members. And we really felt this would be better addressed as part of looking at coverage related to all different workforce housing types and making sure that we're really looking at those coverage regulations and analyzing them from an environmental perspective so that any, any incentives that we design are applied to all workforce housing types if appropriate and looked at for their environmental quality benefits. So as I mentioned, coverage is one of the priority housing action items that the working group identified that they want to focus on. It was in the long-term set of actions. We may move it into the medium-term actions because it's already kind of starting to come up as broadly applied to all workforce housing issues. So we'll talk about the priority actions at the end of the meeting. So I'll come back to that. Then I also want to talk about development rights, and there's 2 things I want to talk about related to development rights. So one is how our current development rights system really is designed to incentivize development that is walkable, close to transit, and town centers. And then I also want to mention sort of a theme that was arising at the last Tahoe Living Working Group, which was around, there's sort of a limited number of bonus units, but we still need to find ways to really incentivize workforce housing. So I'm just going to touch on both of those things before we move on to talking about the final code recommendations and the actual draft code. So, so ADUs do require a development right, and there's a few ways to get those development rights. So if your project is within the bonus unit boundary, the walkable area, you are eligible for a bonus unit, which is equivalent to a development right for free if you meet certain requirements. And one of those requirements is that the unit cannot be used as a vacation rental or a short-term rental. So that's really an incentive for ADUs that are close to transit and town centers. If you're outside that boundary, there's still some constraints associated with getting a development right, but we still wanted to make that available in part to help the California jurisdictions comply with the California law. So there's wait times and costs associated with getting development rights outside of the boundary. Also, for all development rights, whether it's a residential unit of use or a bonus unit, those new units are subject to our air quality mitigation fee, and the governing board is currently reviewing some changes to that fee to make it a transportation impact fee. And that fee would vary with proximity to transit. So that again is another way to really incentivize development close to transit. So last time we, we did hear some ideas came up around further incentivizing development rights for ADUs or for workforce housing. Development rights are not one of the specific actions that the working group identified. So it's not part of the near term, medium term, or long term actions. We did want to point out that through the Development Rights Strategic Initiative that was approved in 2018, that initiative specifically allowed for conversions between different types of development rights, like CFA to residential units or tourist units to residential, because there was a recognition that we didn't have enough residential units left. So you're going to see some of the next code changes relate to that. And there's potential maybe through the conversion process to look at further incentives down the road, but it's not part of this proposal or part of the main set of priority actions. So, okay, let's go on to the next slide. Okay, so just back to what the ADU regulations will be once we look at some of these code changes that we've presented in the staff packet. Local jurisdiction ADU regulations will also apply. And we want to just talk about what each of those regulations are. So Douglas County and Washoe County have codified, they've mirrored TRPA's code language of only allowing ADUs on parcels of greater than 1 acre in their Tahoe-based code. So because of our code, they basically adopted that into their own code. So even if we make a change to our code related to parcel size, that 1 acre parcel size limit will still be in place in Douglas County and Washoe County, but they would have the opportunity to change that through area plan amendments. And they are both looking at some area plan amendments down the road. On the California side, the city of South Lake Tahoe, El Dorado County and Placer County are either in the process of or have already passed their own specific accessory dwelling unit regulations, and those really relate to the design, the size, and they also all specify that ADUs must be allowed on all residential parcels. And also in accordance with California law, they specify that you cannot have rentals of less than 30 days, so no short-term rentals in those ADUs. So next slide, please. Okay, so that sums up the ADU recommendations that we're proposing. And now I want to go through 2 other code changes, and then we'll take questions or comments on the draft language. So one of the consensus items that was actually part of the bonus unit boundary discussion, or sorry, that was actually part of the density discussion last time, was where do we want to encourage development and what do we consider walkable? So the current bonus unit boundary is limited to within 1/2 mile of transit. And that has been somewhat problematic, primarily because there are specific neighborhoods that are identified as incentive areas for transferring residential units of use for affordable development. And some of those weren't included in that boundary. Also, the walk shed from transit was not, or sorry, from town centers was not included in that boundary either. So there were some areas that were still considered walkable to town centers that weren't included. So what the working group identified as an area of consensus was that the bonus unit boundary should be expanded to add the 1/2 mile distance from town centers, and also add areas that are zoned multi-residential, where there's quite a bit of affordable housing now. And those are areas that have generally been considered walkable in the past. And that it doesn't add a lot of area overall, it adds about 15% to the boundary. So going to the next slide. Okay, so the final code change, sort of larger code change, there's one more sort of technical change at the end that I'll mention. But we also, the working group identified that allowing non-conforming tourist density to be used for residential units when a tourist project is redeveloped into a residential project or where there's a change of use. So we have quite a few older tourist units, most, if not all of them, which are in close proximity, which are either in town centers or close to transit. That's sort of the nature of hotel units. Our current code allows these tourist units to be grandfathered in if they are converted to new tourist units, but not if they're converted to new residential units. So because our residential densities are so much lower than tourist densities, there's a strong disincentive to convert to residential. And as I mentioned before, we started introducing some equity between converting tourist units to residential units in the Development Rights Strategic Initiative, but the densities actually don't really allow that to happen on site. So please refer to the packet for the actual code language to give feedback on that. Also, since we printed the packet, our TRPA's current planning department has identified a couple of other clarifications related to non-conforming residential densities that we are also planning to bring forward as we move this packet forward for approvals. But it's basically just clarifying how we were already interpreting our code. But it's basically allowing non-conforming residential to be maintained through redevelopment. So before we get to the working group comments, there was just one other change that was really a cleanup item related to the Development Rights Strategic Initiative, which you probably saw in the packet. And that was to allow bonus units in the moderate and achievable pool to be used for affordable, as our affordable pool is getting very low. So that change is in there as well. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Brendan.
Great. Thanks, Karen. All right, let's go to the working group members first, and then we could take some public comment after that. So please go ahead and use the hand raising function at the bottom of your screen, and I will go ahead and call on you. So first, I'm going to go to John Falk.
Thank you very much. First off, I just wanted to say to staff, outstanding work on putting together this package. It was impressive in every way. I've been to the other meetings. I thought it was the discussion was well reflected in the work product here, and then over and above that, the internal intellectual work that went into this is truly impressive, and so I just wanted to give them kudos for that. Even the parts that I don't particularly like are still well done, well written, and so to that end, with the exception of attachment C, the draft deed restrictions, which I'll talk offline with her on, everything else is outstanding. So I just wanted to say at the outset that that the proposals as they are presented, while they're not perhaps the end step, they are an outstanding first step. And I absolutely agree that we need to keep the momentum moving on getting additional housing and getting additional shifts in how housing is allowed in the basin to move. And so I would strongly support continuing to move this process forward, at least for now, in the fashion that it's presented.
Thanks for those kind and thoughtful comments, John. I did get a chat from someone that they're having a hard time finding the hand raise function. At least on my screen, it's where it says reactions with the face and the little plus. Right at if you click on that, right at the bottom of that, it says raise hand. So I just did mine
And we could also mention for people on the phone, you can click *9 and that will show the raised hand here, and you can click *6 to unmute yourself.
Okay, thanks, Karen.
Yeah.
Emily
and
Setzer.
maybe Alyssa could put that in the chat actually.
Emily Setzer, go ahead.
Thank you. I think these are great, great progressive steps for TRPA to be making. Totally support them. I do have a question whether a junior ADU would require a residential unit of use. And we would support it not needing one simply because it's already a bedroom in a home. But what on that?
So I think there's a little bit of a gray area related to a junior ADU because the kitchen facilities, there's a variety of kitchen facilities that qualify for a junior ADU. And we've been looking at those. Most minimal kitchen facilities may not meet the definition of TRPA's kitchen facilities. So if that's the case, it really is just sort of a separate room. And I don't think that would require a development right. But if it does have a full kitchen and TRPA has a definition of a kitchen, then it would require a development right.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. I don't see other hands raised, but Rebecca Bryson would like to make a comment. Go ahead, Rebecca.
Hi. Well, first I wanted to echo what John said and what Emily said. Great work. And I think it really reflects the group and I'm super impressed. That being said, and you may kill me, I wanted to just put out one possibility for the future. So it could be like a future thing. I always remember what Mia said at one of the first housing meetings is that we want to incentivize what we want and we want to penalize what we don't want. And I think I keep hearing at all the housing meetings and from citizens, we want more workforce housing, we want less VHRs, and we want less monster homes. And we want to protect the environment with coverage and such. So I was wondering about a potential thing where we would, in a way, penalize the bigger homes. I applaud that you could build it on any size parcel, but we could put something in there that says if you have a home over X number of square feet, you don't get to do an ADU. And one, for any new development, it would encourage people to keep it under a certain size in order to do the ADU. Two, I think the people who live in residential areas that have these monster homes, the last thing they want to see is the monster home getting an ADU, which at least in the city allows them to then rent out their monster home again. There could be other options, like the monster homes could put in junior ADUs or something. And I don't want to propose it for this round or anything, but eventually we have never tackled the issue of the monster homes. You know, this is opening up more housing, but what really seems to upset people is the monster homes. So I just thought I would put it out there.
Thanks, Rebecca. Karen, do you want to read the message from Elizabeth?
Yeah, so Elizabeth Ballman messaged me and I can read it, Elizabeth, and maybe you can clarify. You say Elizabeth says, when you say cannot be used for vacation rental, is this a blanket prohibition or a limit? I am concerned about total prohibitions on locals, full-time residents to Airbnb when they are on vacation or when they are there. I understand full-time resident as minimum 10 months per year. The ability to supplement income with short-term rental is an important asset that locals should not be deprived of. Is there anything I should know on this? Yeah, thanks for this comment. So, right, local jurisdictions there's a variety of impacts and benefits associated with vacation rentals, and each jurisdiction, you know, is kind of looking at how they deal with those individually. The California jurisdictions are subject to California's legislation related to accessory dwelling units, and that legislation does not allow the accessory dwelling units to be used for vacation rentals. So they are following that regulation. And I'm not exactly sure what you mean by a blanket prohibition or a limit. So if you want to clarify, feel free.
Sure. Okay. Well, thanks for explaining that state rule. That makes sense. You know, generally, with prohibitions on vacation renting, you know, I certainly understand that what we don't want is permanent housing to become vacation housing. But my concern is that owners lose the, the kind of, if the baby gets thrown out with the bathwater, and owners lose, lower income owners lose the capacity to supplement their income with short-term rentals, which can be done while at the same time maintaining permanent residency, right? So that's what I mean by prohibition rather than limit. I would support a limit, no more than 2 months of vacation renting. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So TRPA has some code related to neighborhood compatibility requirements. So if the local jurisdictions are meeting those neighborhood compatibility requirements, short-term rentals remain in their purview. So the California jurisdictions are really subject to the California law, as I mentioned, and then on the Nevada side, there's quite a bit of limitations right now on ADUs as a whole. So those are the regulations that are in place right now. I know that some other areas have looked at like an owner occupancy requirement. So as long as like 1 or 2 units or 1 unit on the parcel is owner occupied, that's one option. We're not looking at that as part of this proposal right now.
And just to clarify, Karen, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the California law applies prospectively. So this is really addressed at ADUs coming down the pike as opposed to, multiple units on the property that might exist currently. So those are the restrictions moving forward.
Thanks.
Thanks. Okay, we've got some hands raised, so I'm going to go in the order I saw them. Go ahead, Brandy.
Thank you. Karen, I know and Brendan, you both have already talked to me about my questions, so thank you very much offline for those conversations. I guess my question here is, within this proposal that you guys are pushing forward, are there any specific housing types that are being discussed, and will tiny homes be included in that housing type for approval as an ADU unit?
I don't know if Brendan wants to jump in on this. So as I mentioned, the local jurisdictions are really the ones that set the design standards for ADUs, and that includes like building standards. So it's really the local jurisdictions building standards that apply. So TRPA has never really specified like the size of the unit or anything about like snow load. That's really up to the local jurisdiction. So we are not recommending any type of specification about type or size.
Do you feel like that would be beneficial to include in this proposal, or do you feel like staying away from that is better to leave it open? I see a nodding head from Mr. John over here, but.
Yeah, we will have standards in our ADU ordinance. Again, we're looking to mimic state law, and we are taking an ADU ordinance amendment to our board this year, probably in June or July is our anticipated date. So we will have standards on sizing and bedroom counts and parking requirements and things like that. But as far as, building a single home on a lot, we do have a process. We do have, building department protocols to follow, et cetera, kind of like we've talked about, Brandy.
So as I understand it, and just correct me if I'm wrong, because again, I'm learning here. I'm very new to this whole thing. As I understand it, TRPA isn't the really right place to start for the ADU ordinances. It's actually the city of South Lake Tahoe, correct? Bringing some sort of change to those ordinances as they sit currently to include tiny homes as a house type for ADUs, if they can be approved on the property or parcel itself, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
And just keep in mind the ADU needs to be an accessory dwelling. So there has to be a primary dwelling also.
Right, 100%. Okay.
Yeah.
That's, so where would you send me then in my hunt to change these city ordinances? Am I in the right place or am I in the wrong place? Should I be sitting in, the airport, or what should I be doing?
I think I'm glad that you brought up tiny homes. I think a lot of people are interested in these. And I know Placer County has kind of looked a little bit at, you know, what the implications of having a tiny home on wheels are for their accessory dwelling unit ordinance. I think it's good that you're here, and probably it would be great if you do look through our code and make sure there's nothing that prohibits what you want to do. And if there is, like, let us know and we can look at it. But
I mean,
otherwise,
the biggest thing is that you're just, it's a movable house, right? So like the way that the ordinance are written right now is if I took a tiny house and put it on a foundation, stick built, that's 100% okay for me to do. But the second I take that entire house and put it on top of wheels, that's not okay. And that's how the ordinances are currently written. And even though it's the same house, it's just on wheels, right? Because it's movable. So I'm just struggling as far as the direction of where to put my efforts of spending my time to get this changed. Because to me, here's where I'm coming from. I just bought a house in South Lake Tahoe. I want to live here forever, just like my family has done for over 100 years. Okay, I want to be here forever. I want my kids to be here, but I can't do that if I can't afford to live here. And asking me to build a stick-built structure on my property that is already costing me a lot of money to be here is like, it's like I'm being forced into a monetary situation that I don't want to be in, where you can get a very affordable, nice, tiny house and put it in your backyard as an ADU under all these ordinances where you're allowed to have an ADU, right? I have all the other requirements. But what I'm looking to do is just have a more affordable way of putting an ADU on my property. But I'm being told I can't do that because of wheels. So I'm just trying not to like spin my wheels and spending time where I shouldn't be. Like, where should I go sit and start going, wheels are okay?
Yeah, why don't we look offline? We can discuss it in more detail offline, Brandy, and make sure that that our code is, you know, either that there's a clear place to engage in our code, or if not, then looking into the local jurisdiction codes.
Okay, I just want to make sure that I'm doing the right thing. And I don't want to be annoying or thorn in anyone's side, but I think that this is a really, really cool thing. And I know that we already have a few parcels that are being used with tiny homes in them here in South Lake Tahoe in the city. And I know that a few projects have been approved to put these as more residential. I don't want to say mobile home because that's not what they are. They're tiny home parks, but I mean, I certainly don't want to be a mobile home park. I just want to put one in my backyard, you know?
Yeah, Brandy, California does classify tiny homes as an RV and not a permanent dwelling. And so
and that's why we need to change that, because it's so
one
silly.
place to go would be, yeah, the state would need to change their classification. And also Zach Thomas from the city is on, and Zach might be a good resource for you to call since you're asking about city property.
Oh, don't worry. Zach and you and John Friedrich and I are all going to talk to Dan and F, whatever his name is. We're all going to get on a call. We're all going to talk. It's going to be awesome.
Okay. Thanks, Brandy.
All right, thanks.
All right, I'm going to go to John. Back to John Falk.
Thank you. I just wanted to briefly respond, not to the last comment, but the comment before, but to the last comment, absolutely. It's probably going to take going down to the state legislature and getting some code amendments, but with their acceptance of the housing crisis as being a primary driver of their current legislative agenda, it might be the right time to go and seek a legislative remedy. But to speaking to the item before it, I totally understand that there is major pushback about the huge homes, or as people derisively call them, McMansions. But we believe as an industry that housing across the price point spectrum, across the size and type, all housing eventually increases housing affordability and availability, because as the housing stock increases, then inevitably the housing price is driven by demand. Now, we don't want to see one type. So if it was all, 5,000 plus square foot homes, that would probably be inappropriate. But the mix is totally appropriate. It's a private property right. But also equally important, when you have these large homes, a caretaker on site, especially if it's a vacation home, is oftentimes seen as highly desirable. And that'd be a full-time resident who usually has a job. Their job isn't usually just looking after the large home. It's also that they work at Dave's Ski Shop or at Alpine Meadows or wherever. And so they actually are local employees, but they would live in that ADU, and then there'd be an on-site presence on that very expensive property. And so there are, in fact, a number of people that look for the opportunity to build over their garage to have an on-site caretaker. And also, if you were to engage in anything that would discourage or disallow any type of home from having an ADU, you would be moving further away from current California state law. And what you're doing now is bringing you closer to compliance with California state law. And I would ask you to continue along that line. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks everybody for their comments on that. I also just want to make sure that if people have comments on the specific code that we have proposed, that people get a chance to comment on that. If it's a very technical comment that doesn't need discussion from the rest of the working group, then you can talk to me about that offline. But if there's something where there's a concern with any of the language, let's make sure that we get to those comments.
Yep. Mia, go ahead. Oh, you're muted, Mia.
Of course, there's always one of those, right? I apologize. My question, and thank you for all this work. I know it's a lot to process and try to turn into TRPA code, but I'm troubled by a couple of things. So one, how is it being proposed that even though there's a deed restriction on the ADU, how do you determine it's not rented? How do you determine who's living there is going to be, say, if it's a bonus unit resident, you know, at whatever AMI level it's going to be pulled down from, how do you ensure compliance with that AMI? For example, the example John just suggested, $5,000 home, I want to build an ADU over my garage. So I'm going to pull a free bonus unit from TRPA to put my 200 square foot ADU over my garage. And oh, by the way, you know, wink, wink, my caretaker lives there. But during the week, it's my friends, my guests, it's an extension, my mother-in-law. How do you confirm that? And they just got a free bonus unit and they just took it off the TRPA inventory list. And the equivalency, a bonus unit, you know, I build 1, 2, and 3, 4 bedroom apartments. So a bonus unit could be a 4-bedroom apartment, right? Serving a huge amount of people and workforce, or it could be this 200 square foot fancy bonus unit above someone's big home McMansion garage, right? How do you differentiate the two? Because part of the challenge, I think, early on is we talked a little bit, and I know John Hester talked about this, looking at an equivalency. So we heard, at least on the North Shore, average home is about 3,000 square feet on the North Shore. Average home in South Lake Tahoe, they're going to be a lot smaller. The areas you've defined as far as your transit priority areas are all much smaller lots. So your homes, in many cases, could be 600 square feet to begin with. That's your primary home. And then, you know, maybe you only have enough space to put in a small ADU, but then, you know, you may even still be under 2,000 square feet. And so you've just given away that entire bonus unit for something so small. And is the unintended consequence then for the people who are savvy enough to pull these bonus units first to build whatever size, if there is no size restriction or equivalency, I worry, given the commodities, that, you know, it's just going to be first come, first serve. And it isn't going to be the people who are probably the most in need, right? Because it's hard to navigate this process. And so, you know, the challenge is the people with means might be first at the door and there is no compliance, right? So there's no penalty if someone of higher income is living there because no one certifies who lives there. So in the affordable housing world, there are certifications. We actually have to certify, make a lot of statements around who's living there, prove the income levels, and every year you're recertifying that person. And then there's a lease, a year lease. And so that same household, number of people, income, that thing. So there really isn't a lot of wiggle room for changing that. But because it's so hard, these are single family homeowners, how does one confirm that the bonus unit indeed will be for the workforce?
So we do have a compliance and monitoring system where the owners of the bonus unit need to submit an annual form, you know, certifying that they are using the bonus unit as as is written into the deed restriction. So there are penalties written into the deed restriction for not complying. And that was established during our development rights strategic initiative system, and we're proposing to carry that over. I hear what you're saying about the size and the first come first serve, and those are some of the issues that came up last time. And I think we're going to touch on that a little bit in Alyssa's density item. But I guess I would ask, is there any change that you would propose to the code changes that we have put forward so far for this packet?
I personally think that needs to be thought through around the equivalency issue, because what is the unintended consequence here? And and how do you make sure that it's going to be utilized? Because it's essentially you're saying, TRPA is saying, we believe the ADUs will be part of the workforce housing solution because we are going to prioritize essentially bonus units for this use. But on the flip side, it's going to be hard because a lot of people self-certify all kinds of things, and oftentimes it's a little bit of a stretch. So without a penalty, what are you going to do? Come back and say, oh, you got to tear your house down? You're not. It's a challenge.
Okay, well, I would encourage everybody to look at the deed restriction, and the compliance form is included in the packet. It's actually in the second staff report. So I would encourage people to look at that and make sure that you send us comments. But yeah, I thanks Mia for the comment about the equivalency and the size issue.
Because if we could figure out, because then, could you expand the bonus pool? I think that's what I'm trying to get at, because I am concerned that the ADUs will be a very popular thing. If tiny homes works, or if people can figure out ways to convert their garages, it's a very low hanging fruit, easy fix, right? People can't, the demand is there. So, you could easily be giving away these bonus units that could be, 5,000 square foot affordable homes, versus 200 square feet. So I would love for TRP to look at that. I don't feel like that's resolved because I don't think that that's an equivalency. And I don't think, technically speaking, that bonus units can truly be considered part of the workforce if they're not part of RENA, for example. In California, we have RENA, so we have to have, equivalencies around how much, affordable workforce housing. I don't believe any of these would count towards the RENA figures, and maybe Zach could talk about that. But, that's part of it. So, these bonus units are critical from at least the California side, because they're part of what will enable the production of long-term deed restricted affordable units that can be absolutely credited towards RENA and housing workforce goals. Just saying, sorry, but other than that, it's great.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Mia. Gavin Feiger, go ahead.
Hey, thanks, Brendan, and Karen and Alyssa and everybody who's been working on this. I think it does, this proposal is a really good balance between state and TRPA law and between, getting more housing on the ground and protecting the environment. I had one clarifying question and then maybe a comment based on that. For the maintaining the tourist density, I think it's a great idea, but there was a little piece about the extra residential units that come from the conversion from TAU being banked on the site. Does that mean that that 50% extra residential units is like unavailable? What exactly does that mean?
So because of our conversion ratios, a tourist unit, if it's converted to multifamily, it actually converts from 1 tourist unit to 1.5 multifamily units. In our proposal, say you have 20 tourist units on a site, we're saying, and say that's non-conforming, that's over the allowable tourist density. If we are saying that you can convert all 20 of those units to residential, but when you do that conversion, if they're multifamily, you're going to get more than 20 units. You're actually going to get 30 units. But we're saying you can't build those 30 units on that site, that you can bank the remaining 10 units that you got from that conversion.
So they can be transferred. They would just become like, they could sell them.
Yeah.
Like the property owner could sell them. Basically, they couldn't use them on the site, but they could sell them.
Correct.
Okay. All right, that makes sense. I was just wanting to make sure that they were like still available and not somehow permanently locked up. Is there any, I don't know if this is out of the scope of this, but would there be any way to take those extra units and put them into the bonus, units? Because you're giving these property owners, pretty good value there. So if they can't use those extra residential units, maybe they could go into the bonus unit pool.
Okay, we can.
Something to think about in the future, maybe. But yeah, I think this is a great balance and support everything in here.
Okay.
Thank you, Gavin. Zach Thomas, go ahead.
Thanks, Brendan. So hearing a couple things that have come up here, I'll touch on really quick, and then I have a question or a clarifying comment that I think probably Karen, you can answer really quick. Regarding the discussion of tiny homes, yep, absolutely, Brandy, feel free to reach out to me. I'm very happy to talk to you about that. Currently, right now, the ordinance that the City Council just adopted is consistent with state law with regard to, kind of tiny homes and ADUs. And currently, tiny homes on wheels are classified by the state as mobile homes. And, right or wrong, whatever, that's just kind of how it is today. And the city adopted an ordinance consistent with that. Regardless, it's perhaps a discussion, absolutely, we'd be happy to engage in. So feel free to reach out to me. Regarding the RHNA discussion that Mia mentioned, actually, where the city of South Lake Tahoe is in the process of beginning its required housing element update, of which a significant part of that is addressing the RHNA requirements for the state that are required by the state of California. So we'll be looking into all consistency with those requirements and meeting those numbers. So just FYI for the group, you'll be hearing a lot more about that in the coming months. We're just in the very initial stages of that. So just wanted to mention that because it came up. Regarding the clarifying question, Karen, not totally clear with the proposed changes, but would junior ADUs, for example, that are consistent with the city code under 500 square feet, and let's say they're attached to the house, does that require an allocation and a development right? Or is that if they're located like within an existing structure or attached to the house, is that not required? I wasn't clear on that.
Yeah, if it has a kitchen that meets TRPA's definition of a kitchen, then yes, it would require a development right.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Zach.
Hey, Brendan, this is Sean. I don't know. For some reason I was coded under Karen Fink for a while there. I'm not sure.
I just renamed you, Shauna.
Okay, thank you. Anyhow, I just wanted to jump in before there was a couple of clarifications with regards to those tiny homes and second and ADUs as far as RHNA on behalf of Placer County. So Placer County, it is true, HCD does qualify tiny homes on wheels as RVs, except when a local jurisdiction adopts standards by which allows them as permanent housing. And that's how Fresno, Mendocino, and San Diego have adopted their ordinances that allow for tiny homes to be used as permanent housing. Tiny homes on wheels, I should be specific. So that's what Placer County is looking at as well. We don't anticipate these to be a high use, but we do anticipate that there is a unique need, whether it's through some kind of a seasonal housing need, but they can be determined as permanent housing because they're permanent to the person who's using them. They're just not permanently affixed to the ground. And so we are looking at that as part of a code update. And then as far as secondary dwellings or ADUs and JADUs, we actually are just completing our housing element cycle. We did receive compliance or a preliminary compliance letter from the state. We include policies that allow for ADUs to be counted under RHNA as lower income units if they are the smaller size, less than 750 square feet. because we do monitor and survey annually our ADUs that we have or that we've permitted. So the state has agreed to that at this point. We've always, since 2007 or 8, when the state started letting us qualified all ADUs as moderate, automatically non-deed restricted moderate. But we were able to actually convince them to allow us to count them as lower income if they were less than 750 square feet. And we continued our annual monitoring and surveying. So I just wanted to kind of clear that up, because Placer County, based on some of the conversations I heard, maybe looking at this a little bit differently. So.
Thanks, Shauna. That's helpful. How about Eric Young?
Howdy, everybody. Nice to see you. I want to start off by saying I support all the amendments. We took part in the working group and thought it was a pretty deliberative and thoughtful effort to get to where we are. We're not seeking to solve every issue. I think we're seeking to try and remove some existing barriers, open the door to some things that we know are currently closed and may be useful. But I think it does kind of mark the beginning of a discussion and not the end. Even after these are adopted, we need to keep talking about how we move forward with all these different housing types. I really support what Mia was trying to bring up here. What is our pool? Is it possible to really increase the size of the pools? Because that would be pretty meaningful. But what I think that discussion really points to is that, and Karen, you were part of this, and Chase, you were part of this discussion we had recently about Washoe County. And I don't want to speak for all the other jurisdictions, but sitting here in Washoe County, it would be really helpful for us, and that's why we're going to back up and do some studies and have a good look at it, is to have some sort of a basic vision of, well, how many, when we're looking forward, how many of our workforce housing units do we think should be in ADUs, and how many should be in a multifamily development that Mia might want to stand up? What is our vision of how we should spread out the need, and what is our need? It's changed over the past. We did a study a few years ago, but to be honest, we need to have a new look at what our needs actually are, because that study's going on many years old now. So I don't know where everybody else stands, but I think for us, even though it's very positive to open up these doors and to move forward on these amendments, we need to take some steps afterwards to really understand how we want our community to absorb the units that it needs to absorb. How many should be dedicated to what different types of diversity. I don't think we really envision the entire need being absorbed by accessory dwelling units. And so if that's the case, if they're not all going to be accessory dwelling units, how do we divide it up? What is our vision of what that might look like? And we need to work on that vision, specifically a little bit more in Washoe County. I don't know where the other jurisdictions stand. If you really have a really clear vision of just how many of these you feel you need or want in your communities to absorb the need, and how many other types of units that Mia might be interested in working on, and using some of the units from the pool to develop should be used in your community for those other kinds of development. So we're going to work on trying to get a vision of that and a better understanding of that for Washoe County over the next year or so. But I do support these amendments going forward, and I really support Karen's really thoughtful work in bringing us all along to this point. So I'm done. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. I think I'll go to Natalie Yanish next, and then to Brandy.
Thank you, everyone. Natalie Yanish with the Contractors Association of Truckee, Tahoe. I appreciate all of the conversation that we've been having. There's a couple of points that I wanted to bring up, and if I understood Karen correctly, by increasing the bonus unit boundary around transportation, that's only kind of minimally increasing the area or the available parcels that would qualify for bonus units. I think Karen had said it was 15%. So I'm wondering if there's any way to expand on that, because, you know, as we all know, our transit system does change over time, and it is a difficult, it's difficult to predict where it's going to go. Also, it seems like it would knock out pretty much most of the homes for bonus units in the county, just because, you know, Myers is basically the only area that's got that, you know, density element or that transportation component. So I don't know if that is still open for conversation to try to figure out how to expand that for bonus units, but I did want to bring that comment forward. And the other comment that I wanted to make is that, you know, even when the conversion incentives came along, you know, there was a lot of talk every time a TRPA restriction gets loosened that there's going to be all this demand for development, but private industry with the cost of construction still cannot make it pencil. So there again, I want to say, you know, any restrictions that we're putting on these properties is going to make it much more difficult for contractors to build these homes, and to go to, you know, the entire part of increasing our pool. You know, yes, it's kind of crazy, but to throw it out there, shouldn't, you know, maybe we should have all ADUs, whether or not they're market rate or affordable housing, you know, not require a residential unit of use. And, you know, I know that that would be a really difficult and long process to go through, and it would be a major policy change for the TRPA, but that might be something to consider, because if you think about it, if you're developing a property and you've got a limitation on the size that you can build take your residential unit of use or your commodity, you're going to build a 4,000 square foot home. You're not going to build a 750 square foot ADU. So I think that the incentives really need to be loosened as much as possible in order to get private industry to participate in these programs. And those were really the two items that I wanted to bring up. Thank you.
Thanks, Natalie. Brandy, we'll go back to you.
First, I'll comment on Natalie's comment. I 100% agree. I feel like if you have people that own private property that can help establish some more affordable housing without having, you know, a single family private home, you know, already on the property to help with this need that we have in the community, we're going to get a lot further along in this discussion of affordable housing. I wanted to ask Shauna if she would be willing to share any ordinances that you guys are creating in Placer County to include tiny homes as a conversation in your ordinances with our city council, to see if there's some way that we can be, you know, partnered up on this, since our counties do touch each other, and we can make this happen. I'm so excited.
So absolutely. Our ordinance, it's been drafted since 2018. We actually were taking it separately. But then we had started kind of a package of all other code amendments for, you know, related to housing and assisting affordable housing to get developed. And so our board asked that it be included in the larger packet. So it's a piece of just a bigger group of amendments that are going forward, but it's available on our website. I'm happy I can throw it in the chat, where the draft ordinance lives and exists. We just completed the environmental on the whole package. It's heading to probably the Planning Commission late this spring and early summer to hopefully to our Board of Supervisors to consider all the amendments. So happy, I'll put that link in the box. Like I said, it's part of a bigger one, so might need to do a little searching, but you'll find the tiny homes in there. And then Emily Setzer was actually the author of it, so I, you know, reach out to her, and she'd probably be happy to share with you what she learned and all the resources that she found as she was pulling that together.
It's so exciting. Thank you so much. I'm on a mission. I don't know if you can tell, but I'm on a mission, and you're helping, and I appreciate it.
No problem.
Thank you. Nia, I see you have your hand raised again.
Yeah, I just want to make one quick comment because it popped in my head. So I keep going back to the equivalency. I'm sorry to keep beating this horse, but going back to what if, just here's an idea. You know, you've got an average, you know what the Tahoe average house size is, right? So what if the equivalency is if, you know, your residential unit of use, your house on average, let's say is 3,000 square feet. But if you're, you know, in one of these areas, you want to build an ADU and your primary home is 1,200 square feet, you should be able to build, you know, a 1,500 square foot ADU or something to kind of fit within the average size of a home today in Tahoe. So in other words, if people want to add square footage, like a tiny home on wheels or something, they're permitted within their existing residential unit of use, because combined, the primary and the accessory are still less than the average unit size of a 5,000 square foot home in Tahoe, or something like that. Just to sort of put that out there, because I think then you can start looking at impacts being similar, especially if the ADU is also occupied by the primary household, or, you know, maybe it's the mother-in-law, right? Maybe it's the college student coming home. So it just, you know, that's a lot of times why people are building ADUs, frankly, for support and help. And so rather than monetizing it always, why can't we reward, you know, as we heard from the contractors and realtors, you know, people's own private properties, let them invest within what's already on average? Because a lot of the homes, especially the ones you've delineated, are really small. You know, they're the ones in the grid that are by transit. So those, by virtue of being small, you know, are smaller. And so they shouldn't be penalized to go have to buy a whole RDU that right now someone could build a 4,000 square foot home out of. So just, again, thinking about equivalency, because that's already there. Those impacts are already there.
Thanks, Mia. Okay, I don't see any other hands raised. Does anyone have anything, you know, very specific on the proposed, you know, code language or the exact proposal that Karen is bringing forward? Any last thoughts on that?
I just have to say, I couldn't support it if you don't come up with the equivalency, because I don't think a bonus unit, you know, it should just be free for anybody who wants to stand in line and get a bonus unit regardless of size. Because I think these are precious resources, and as TRPA, you know, you're counting every inch of coverage. I think you know, yet it doesn't really matter what a residential unit of use is, right? It could be 10,000 square feet. There's no limit. It could be 2,000 square feet, or it could be 1,000 square feet. So, I mean, we're so specific on everything else at TRPA down to the centimeter. It's interesting that it's okay to be so general when it comes to these incredibly precious commodities.
You're foreshadowing the next item, Mia, but I hear you about ADUs, and I've noted your comment related to the current proposal.
Any final thoughts on this? Karen, do you want to ask the group anything really specifically, or do you think you have what you need?
I think I have what I need. If anybody has any technical edits, please feel free to send them by email. And at the end of the meeting, we'll go over next steps and timeline.
Okay, great. Do we want to move on to the next item? Does anyone need a 3-minute break, or should we just go right on to the next item?
Are you okay going on to the next item, Alyssa? I was thinking if the presenters are okay, then people could just take breaks on their own. I'm more worried about the presenters needing a break because it's hard for us to leave our screens.
I think I am good to keep going.
Great.
Okay. All right, so we are going to switch gears and talk about density. And when we brought density forward, we also are hearing or have heard from the working group that height and coverage, often what we refer to as kind of the overall building envelope or site constraints, also are kind of an issue depending on where the parcel, the specific parcel location is. And so over the past few weeks since our last working group meeting, we looked at what our code actually incentivizes. And as some of the working group members have pointed out in previous meetings, our code is very rigid on certain things, like just what Mia said. We're very specific about a lot of things related to height, coverage, and density. But then we also have a code that is a little bit more flexible on some other things. And we found that wherever there's flexibility, that is what's going to be maximized. And so right now, the code is more flexible on unit size, which has come up a number of times already in this meeting. And we're seeing that builders maximize that flexibility. So builders will maximize the unit size because that is how they get the biggest return on their investment. And just to point out, in addition to this, the 2 housing needs assessments that have been done in the past couple of years pointed out that it's not just the number of units that we need, but we also need to look at the unit size that has the most demand as well. The South Shore Housing Needs Assessment showed that the largest proportion of households that are looking for housing are in the 1 to 2-person households. So these larger homes that are being built are generally not they're not affordable, and they're not really within that necessary category that we need. So to build on the discussion that we had in the February working group meeting, we talked about alternative approaches for how we could potentially update our density system. And one of these specifically was floor area ratio, which is an approach that has been used in quite a few other jurisdictions to regulate the building's floor area in relation to the size of parcel. And we thought that this could potentially help alleviate some of the challenges that we're seeing related to density. And through this research, what we learned in the past few months is that we sort of have a similar system as floor area ratio with our height and coverage, setbacks and parking constraints that we already have that really already kind of set a floor area ratio that we have to work within. And so building on that, we wanted to find out kind of which constraint had the most impact on the development that we see in the basin. And when I say constraint, I mean coverage, height, or density. And so we looked at, we did a kind of a quick analysis of a few recently built projects and then 2 potential projects that we got inquiries about in the basin. And we found that of the 5 total projects that we looked at, 3 of these were not able to get to the allowed density because of other restrictions. But 2 of the projects were able to max out the densities, primarily because they were both larger parcels of about an acre, and in special areas that allowed multifamily at higher densities. And these properties that were able to get to the allowable density, they probably could have benefited from even more density, and it would have allowed them to build more units. And so our big takeaway from this research was that instead of sort of looking at density separate from these other constraints, as we've sort of talked about in previous meetings, we really need to look at density, coverage, and height sort of as a whole. And I'll get more into this in the next few slides. But really the purpose of these next 3 slides is to show that the package of site constraints really encourages these larger units, as we all know. And oftentimes these units are too large to be affordable to our local workforce. And so again, in the next 3 slides, we've put together kind of a set of scenarios. And just for apples to apples comparison, we've used the same size lot, but in 3 different zones that allow where I guess the zoning is different. And so the first is just in a single family area. It doesn't allow, the zone doesn't allow multifamily. We're using a pretty standard 6,000 square foot lot for all of these scenarios, just again, for apples to apples comparison. But we, essentially this shows that with a 2.5-story height allowance and a 30% coverage allowance, we're assuming that this is on high capability land, you can see that the building envelope allows for about 4,500 a square foot house, which would include parking. And so while we generally don't see 4,500 square foot homes being constructed, we do see homes that are close to that size. getting up to around 3,500. And so in this next scenario, this is looking at kind of the same lot, but in an area that allows multifamily up to 20 or up to 15 units per acre. Again, the coverage, we're assuming it's on high capability land at 2.5 stories of allowable height. And using the square footage that these constraints would produce, it would allow a total building envelope of 4,500 square foot. But if you wanted to build a duplex, which the density in this specific area would allow for, you could have a maximum home size of almost 2,500 square feet for both of the duplex units, which is still, quite a bit bigger than what our average single family home size is. And then getting into town centers, again, using the same hypothetical lot, we're seeing that the envelope is much bigger because the coverage allowances and the height allowances are much higher. And so we realize that there are probably a lot of other constraints that would prevent, this specific scenario from happening. But we did find that the max home size could be up to 5,600 square feet. And so although in town centers and areas that allow additional height, coverage, or density, where the majority of our multifamily housing is being built, there's still a limit of 25 units per acre. And so on this specific lot, you would only be able to get 3 units total with a 25 unit per acre allowable density. And so really the takeaway from these slides is that our regulations are not set up they don't set up the environment to build smaller, more affordable units, especially because the national average for square foot homes is about 1,600 square feet. I would imagine in the South Shore, the average unit size is about the same as that. Mia mentioned it's about 3,000 square feet in the North Shore. But again, our existing code really incentivizes building these larger units, which has come up multiple times. And so we know that these scenarios kind of look at the ideal hypothetical scenario. So it would be a flat lot in high capability land, which we know is not always realistic, depending on the location of the parcel. But just using this as an example, we would like to kind of take the next step and look at ways in which we can allow flexibility in exchange for smaller housing. Height, coverage, and density are obviously very integral to TRPA's land use regulatory system. And making substantial updates to those systems would potentially take years. But instead, I think we'd like to talk about whether or not we want to bring in unit size as sort of a variable into this package of site constraints that we have already, and whether or not we feel like we can trade off some flexibility for some flexibility with densities to allow additional units on these parcels in exchange for kind of a maximum unit size. And so with that, I think I'd like to open it up to just overall thoughts on this approach, whether working group members have any suggestions.
Thanks, Alyssa. Mia, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, my housekeepers were coming and vacuum cleaners are going to turn on really soon, so I'm going to have to speak quickly. Thank you so much, Alyssa, for putting together the stool, because it is absolutely necessary to think about coverage, height, and density. In my experience, what we find is that 30% coverage is free. Let's not forget that. When we say 70% coverage, that means you have to buy coverage from someplace and transfer it in. It's not a give me. Right? So one thing, if you really want density, make it legal, give away, allow people to have more coverage to make the density work by right, not go find it and beg CTC to sell it to you so that you can transfer it in, because the cost of coverage is $25 a square foot. You know, let me just give a quick example. The project in South Lake Tahoe, 11 acres, the cost of coverage is $3.3 million. And we already have it all approved. And that's in addition to the cost of land, in addition to the cost of development. So what's free is 30% coverage for a single family home. And your RAU is also free. So what are you getting? 90% of all the housing stock are single family homes. If we really want to get serious about encouraging density in multifamily, you have to make it just like single family home and by right. Allow for, if you don't, and go back to maybe equivalencies around RAUs, like if you're building, the thing is when you show 2- and 3-story units, think about, you have to buy an RAU to add that, right? Or a bonus unit. So the cost, and then sewer fees on top of that. So the cost of multiplying it by unit is not an incentive unless somehow the coverage is free and you can do height. The other thing about height is we have to measure in TRPA from the lowest point of natural grade. That makes very difficult sites in Tahoe where it's very natural. So I apologize, everything's starting up. I'm gonna get off and get back on a phone. And thank you for your listening.
Good comments, Mia, thanks. Who else? I don't see any other hands raised. Who else has thoughts on this for Alyssa? People love it. Rebecca, I see you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm really happy you guys are this. And I also would like to see the height go up. It's pretty interesting to hear what Mia said about the coverage. I didn't realize how. I don't know if we should actually be encouraging maximizing of coverage or maybe maximizing of height. It seems like maximizing of height has less environmental impact, and I'd rather see us focus on height. And maybe for multiple family projects, multifamily projects, 30% coverage could be free, but then you would have to pay for additional to kind of encourage a smaller footprint for environmental reasons. But and I love the idea of giving people more density if they would build smaller units. And I think we would get a lot more of the studios and the 1-bedrooms where the demand is, and be great. So I support it.
Thanks, Rebecca. Anyone else have comments or thoughts on this? We'd love to hear from you if you do.
Hi, Brendan, this is John. I think that it's really important to hear how people feel about a maximum unit size. Then you could get as many units as possible out of the square footage envelope, or as Alyssa described it. I think it's also important for people to realize, should we do that? And I kind of mentioned this earlier, we also would probably need to start looking at some of the other variables like fees and things like that on a per square foot basis too. So it's a sort of complicated undertaking, but from our analysis, it seems like there's a lot of potential to build more smaller units with all the same constraints if we were to control the unit size versus the density number of units on the lot. So anyway, I think that's an important thing for people to weigh in on, because it's not a small undertaking, and we don't want to go down that road if it's not something a lot of people think it's worth looking at. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, John. Gavin, go ahead.
Hey, thanks, Brendan. Yeah, John there, just fees, I think, could be an important piece of this. There might be, I like the idea of a combination of a density incentive for smaller units and combined with, maybe a fee disincentive for larger units. Wondering if there's any, I don't know if this is even possible within TRPA framework, but if there's any way to kind of add tiers to RUUs, like if like bonus units, there's a bonus unit pool, maybe some of the remaining residential units use could be broken up into tiers for different based on square footage. I'm not sure how that would work with like the whole commodity trading system and everything. It might be too complicated, but that might be an opportunity there. But I think the combination of fees and density bonuses could be pretty effective.
Thanks, Gavin. John, why don't you go ahead?
Thanks. Just in response to John Hester's comment, I think it's interesting, and the ones that preceded it that drew it out. But rather than use the word control the size versus the number, versus the number of units on a parcel, my preference would be to see that options are offered, size versus number, and or using, as was just mentioned by the previous speaker, some type of staircase fee structure that would shape development still voluntarily by making it more attractive and more financially feasible to build smaller if you're offered a larger number with a smaller footprint with less cost per unit. Thanks.
Thanks, John. Yeah, CJ, do you want to mention what you just sent me about SB 478?
Sure, thanks, Brendan. Just really quickly, the state of California is proposing SB, what did I say that was, 478, has to do with what you're specifically talking about. I haven't done a full analysis of that proposed bill yet, but it has to do with coverage and incentivizing the smaller housing type of development. Just wanted to bring that to your attention for future discussion, because it may lay just another layer of California state law that we need to reconcile with TRPA. I've sent that link to Brendan. Maybe you can share that on the chat.
Okay, great. Thanks, CJ, for bringing that up. Let's see, John Friedrich has his hand up. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I also really approve of this direction. Just makes a lot of sense, kind of the affordable by design, I guess, movement. And I like what, Gavin's suggestion, a combination of fees and density bonuses. So I think there's a lot of potential here, and certainly encourage further development.
Thanks, John. Let's see. Oh, did you have something else, John Hester?
Yes, I was following up on John Falk's comment. I like him to talk a little bit more about the option idea. I mean, I think what I'm hearing is maybe you could do it either way, the way it currently stands with height, coverage, and density, or you could do it with height, coverage, and size of unit, and see which we would maybe allow applications to come in either way. Is that kind of what you're saying, John?
Correct. Yeah, that just it's an option to allow either program to be forwarded. It kind of uses the form-based code concept in a concrete manner.
Great. Alyssa, did you have any other follow-up questions for the group to spur any other discussion, or do you think you have what you need?
I think those answers are helpful. I think they give us some direction to move forward and kind of come up with an approach of what that might look like. I don't know, Karen, if you had any other specific or questions that you wanted to ask the working group.
Not necessarily. I know Mia had to, oh no, Mia's back. It just seems like some of the points that Mia was bringing up related to the Tahoe average house size and kind of looking for ways to maybe encourage, it seemed very related, like what Mia was saying about like, maybe don't just, say that you can only have an ADU, and it can only be a certain size. Why don't you say like, if this is the average size, you can build within that footprint? I feel like that is pretty related to this conversation, and we hadn't really been thinking about it in relation to ADUs, but maybe there is some nexus there that we can continue to consider. And actually, now that Mia is here, I did actually have a question for Mia, because Mia often comments about some of the height, and we've heard this from some of our other architects that we need more flexibility in height. And we were just kind of wondering, like, what is the range of height that we're talking about? Like, is it just like one additional floor in certain areas, or is it more than that? Like, what should we be thinking about related to height if we do want to introduce any flexibility there?
Thank you. Thank you, Karen, so much. What I'd like to suggest, so this happened to us in Kings Beach. We, because the site was larger and it had, you know, topography and changes, we were forced to measure our baselines of the building from the lowest point of natural grade. So we lost like 2 feet. And so we had to, so in other words, what happened, it artificially reduced how big our building was, and it made it really difficult to fit everything inside, i.e., you know, mechanical systems, et cetera. So the way the rest of the world outside of TRPA measures height is usually just from whatever level grade that you create. So what you're really saying is, if it's a true 4-story, let us build exactly 4 stories. Don't let us say 4 stories, but we're going to start measuring at a -2 feet because there's a low point of grade here. So I think that was probably put in place for a lot of the scenic vistas. You know, when you have beautiful homes, people don't want their views blocked. But we're talking, this affects, unfortunately, the inland areas where you still have topography and these issues. So I think that is an absolute kind of problem, because, you know, we can't predict the different variations of land that we have. So just measuring from one static standard, like basically whatever 0 is, you get the full 48 feet. The other issue too around roof heights, we have to just confirm that, you know, what happens is there's such a drive to have a particular Tahoe look and a particular Tahoe roof style, but oftentimes if the pitch is too steep, you actually can't get that 3rd story in unless you flatten out the roof a little bit. So I know we did that change, Karen, in the South Lake Tahoe plan, but a lot of roofs are really dictated by the localities, which then really prohibit really utilizing that 4th floor or that 3rd floor because the pitch of the roof is so challenging. So if there could be some flexibility, especially when you're building taller buildings, that the roof pitch and where you begin to measure height would be a significant improvement. The other thing I'd like to suggest also around height is, you know, we're looking at another project that's 15 units to the acre in the Tahoe area, and it has an area plan that says it's only 2 stories, yet it's 15 units to the acre and 30% coverage. So it's really difficult to make all that work. And so in some, you know, in some ironic twists, some of these things do act as prohibitions, zoning, frankly, exclusions, or an exclusionary zoning on the underhand side, right? So, you know, even though you're permitted 15 units to the acre because of coverage or height, you actually can't get there. Because if it's a 2-story building, you're going to spread out more horizontally. If you can go up 3 stories because you're building multifamily, then it's less coverage. But then all of a sudden, you're not permitted to go 3 stories. So, you know, those types of conflicting challenges should be removed, because if the zoning is 15 units to the acre, you should allow property owners to take advantage of that full 15 units to the acre without being artificially then hampered because they can't make the coverage or they can't make the height.
Okay, so I'm hearing 2 things. It sounds like everywhere you're saying that where there's not maybe a scenic issue, consider looking at the slope. So
yeah, I don't know how to describe it, but measuring it from the building pad, not the artificial grade.
Karen, this is John Marshall. If I could just maybe help a little bit here. The height calculation, as you may know from doing projects, is really a major issue in Tahoe. And so I don't think we have the flexibility to alter the way that we do it currently, you know, kind of generically. However, if there are, you know, situations like Mia's describing for affordable housing on relatively flat ground or at you know, slopes less than X percentage, something like that, there could be, we could look at something like, you know, an exception like that. You know, the height rules are, you know, they've been in place for a while, and I think it would be much easier to deal with this issue as an exception for affordable housing in particular geographic locations or geomorphic locations, or whatever the correct word is, rather than some broad change to our height rules.
Yeah, and thanks, John. And I should clarify that generally, I think all of these things that we're talking about are related to workforce housing, not just generally, even if we sound like we're talking about it generally. Okay, thanks. Yeah, and that's helpful, Mia, to understand kind of the specific issues.
Okay, how about Nicole? Go ahead.
On a recent project that I worked on with a developer client, he was looking at acre lot within the Tahoe Valley area plan, South Lake Tahoe near the Y, flat lot. And if he wanted to squeeze in the 25 units per acre on top of your snow storage, on top of your parking, on top of your open space requirements, and on top of all the setbacks and easements, he was not able to fit in that density. He looked at doing a 2.5-story building, and the Tahoe Valley area plan does not allow anything over 2 stories. It's specifically written into the zoning for where this project is located. So there's no variance allowed. And with that half extra story, it was concealed within the roof line. So we weren't going over the TRPA, just the general height per, the slope of the lot and the steepness of the roof pitch and so forth, but it wasn't allowed just because it was written into the area plan. So he ditched that whole plan and instead went to a density of 8 units. So there you have it, and that's a pretty current project. It was just too challenging also with the fire department and a ladder truck requirement for access to the property and adjacency of buildings and so forth. So there's other codes that made that going over 2 stories just too challenging for this developer, and he wants to build it quick and fast, and he doesn't want to wait years and years for variances or getting code amendments and so forth. So anyway, that's just my little blip experience recently.
Thanks, Nicole. Let's see, I don't see any other hands. What do you think, Karen? Do you want to move on to our third section here?
Yeah, I think we should. Thanks everybody for all your input. Let's see, this is Alyssa again.
Okay, so the next agenda item is in regards to the eligibility requirement for bonus units. And we did bring this initial idea to you at our last meeting, but we're bringing it back to you today, a bit more fully baked for input and a potential recommendation. As most of you know, the achievable income category was introduced during the Development Rights Strategic Initiative back in 2018. And it was really in an attempt to provide a subsidy, if you will, to local households that make more than 120% of the AMI, which is considered our moderate income category. And we based a lot of that methodology for what would become the achievable income category on the recommendation from the Mountain Housing Council that came out in 2017. And we're finding that the issue with our current code language is that it's focused on setting aside housing for local, or it's not focused on setting aside housing for local workers, and instead it's focused only on income levels. And since the achievable level is quite high because it's based on the amount of income you would need to afford the median home price, which continues, as we all know, to go up. We're seeing that deed restricted homes, in theory, could be occupied by remote workers who don't work in the community and, potentially make enough money to qualify for the achievable category, but are not actually housing our local workforce. And so today we're proposing to change, we're proposing a change to just the achievable income category. And this generally wouldn't affect the moderate and affordable income categories that we have. And when we discussed this at the last meeting, we heard from you guys that there were a number of exceptions that we would need. In most cases, we feel that these exceptions that you guys mentioned, specifically to vulnerable populations, family members, students, and retirees, would fall into the moderate or affordable income categories. And so again, the change that we're proposing today is just impacting that above 120% of the AMI category. And so the moderate and achievable categories would stay the same. And another note on this is one of the questions that we get quite often and has already come up during this meeting is around enforcement and compliance. And so again, I just want to restate that we have an existing compliance system within our bonus unit system that requires an annual compliance form that needs to be submitted by either the homeowner or the property owner. That's just certifying that whoever is living in the unit is income eligible. And so, you know, looking at what this change would do to our compliance system, we don't see a huge compliance burden compared to what we're already doing. There would obviously need to be updates to our form and updates to the questions that we ask annually, but this is already something that we're doing and we feel like we can continue to do. In terms of the proposed boundary, we are proposing that so anyone in this achievable category would need to be employed within the Tahoe Basin boundary or the Tahoe Truckee Unified School District. And the reason that we've included the Tahoe Truckee Unified School District is to be consistent with Placer County's Workforce Housing Preservation Program, which we heard about at the last meeting. And so this really affects Placer County residents if they are getting a bonus unit and they are living outside of the basin boundary. Placer County allows for that right now. And so we've really felt that we needed to be consistent as much as possible with our partners programs as well. We do realize that there are benefits and drawbacks of having a larger boundary. But again, we did want to be consistent and we're open to feedback on this. Another thing to note here is that we have the achievable income category right now. We feel like if we were to make this change, we would need to switch that terminology that we use for that category to either local resident or workforce housing instead of keeping the achievable income level, just because you know, it might get confusing in the future looking back on what had changed. So with that, I'd like to open it up to working group comments, any concerns around these requirements or these or the workforce boundary.
Thanks, Alyssa. John, I saw you raise your hand right away.
Thank you. Yeah, I had the great misfortune of doing a lot of the heavy lifting on the Mountain Housing Council's effort to develop that policy of achievable housing, which is that, of course, the gap between what the AMI area median income is in a given area in our region and the median home price in our region. And that gap is large and getting larger. And unfortunately, well, it depends on how you look at it. If you own property, it's fortunate, I guess. But if you look statewide, no place in the state of California has had a larger increase in value year over year than South Lake Tahoe. It's outstanding. People are fleeing the cities and coming up to the High Sierra. I don't blame them, but that is increasing rather than decreasing the chasm between what the local workforce can afford and what the local force needs. And so anything that expands what qualifies is not only worthy, it's absolutely essential, it's necessary. As was mentioned in the initial narrative by staff, in the staff report, the fact that everything above 80%, you don't have any revenue at the state or local level, or at the state or federal level, to backfill the lack of profitability of building in that range. Even up to 120%, try to find money between 80 and 120, difficult. Above 120, where the real affordability gap is, it's 195, 195% of AMI was the true gap, and that was 2 years ago. That's the real gap. And so we need to have a system that does not conform with state and federal regulations for up to 120, but exceeds it, because our area is unique and the challenges are unique and rather daunting. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Tara Zerato, go ahead.
Hi, yes, I was just going to say, Karen, I'm so sorry that I didn't get back to you sooner with your question about this, but some feedback that I just emailed you is just based on what I've seen of all the jurisdictions, the definition of achievable is always linked to income level. So I'm wondering if it would make more sense to have the word be and instead of or, if you're looking to also provide housing to local workforce, but still kind of be in keeping with how local jurisdictions define achievable.
So if I could just ask for clarification, actually, Alyssa, could you go back to the previous slide? So if we change because one of the things we were thinking of was just keeping the name achievable, but taking away that income, that tied to income. So now we're proposing, and that was one reason why we emailed you to ask you that question, but now we're proposing to actually call this like the local resident / workforce.
I see.
Bonus unit. So does that, if we call it that, does this definition look okay to you?
Yeah, I would just be careful about using the word achievable and not tying it to income. So what I read from your email was achievable was going to be up to 120% AMI or works 30 hours.
Yeah, that is. That's what we were initially proposing.
Good.
So that's good feedback from you. Okay, thank you. Mm-hmm.
Great. Mia, back to you.
Thanks, Brennan. I'd like to suggest the reason why you have the AMI limit is so that you can size up what is the sales price for a home. So if you're at 120% of median, it matters about how many people are in your household and what you can qualify for a mortgage and what the final sales price must be in order to be compliant with, say, 220 or 120 or 180 or whatever the numbers are. If it's just 30% workforce hours or 30 hours a week somewhere in Tahoe, it's going to be hard to set a price. And the thing about AMIs is that they're recalculated every year. So as HUD changes the AMI, that, or whatever the average AMI is, that affects what the 220 number is, and that sets the price for housing. So if you're going to change that definition, you have to come up with another equivalency to set a price, if that makes sense.
That's an interesting comment. Yeah. Let's come back to that after we hear some more comments.
Okay. Eric Young, go ahead.
I think Mia may have just brought up what I wanted to bring up is that there's real meaning behind the existing definitions of affordable housing, low and very low income meeting a certain AMI, and then what it means to be 80%. And those numbers aren't just numbers, they're to help people like me and all of us make our calculations of what we're really doing. And so if we're going to have something that we call workforce, it needs to have a definition that is useful for all of us, that's actually used. It's not just to make us feel good that we're doing something about workforce housing. These terminologies have to have meaningful definitions. And so that may be exactly what Mia just said, I'm not sure, but if what we're doing here is trying to come up with the definition of workforce, well, then I would support that, but it's gonna have to have something actionable behind it. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. Let's see. Do you want to?
Brendan, can I just quickly clarify? So with the workforce definition, that would be what you see on the screen here is the occupant would need to be working 30 or more hours a week within this boundary, the Tahoe Basin boundary, or the Tahoe Truckee Unified School District boundary. And that would be in replacement of the achievable income limits that we have right now, because we feel like those income limits are maybe not representative of the actual income category that needs this housing the most, or needs this subsidy the most. Okay, we can keep going.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that. Okay, back to John and then back to Mia.
Thank you. Just to try to amplify what I was trying to say, I agree that the whole way that they've segmented it is, very low, moderate, and above moderate income housing by HUD and HCD and so forth. It does have meaning, and that meaning does matter. And what it matters for, especially in relation to this region, is the for rent side of the market. When you talk about any of those categories, the for sale segment of the market is pretty much out of the question. And so when you're looking at this last segment of needed local housing, you need to have a more expansive definition, more inclusive definition, to ensure that you actually do house the people that work locally, they live locally. And so the whole idea of AMI of 120, it may work for rent units for the above moderate income individual, but it doesn't work financially. It just doesn't for the for sale segment of the population. They don't qualify at that rate. The home can't be built, penciled out at that rate. And so it's a paper tiger if it only goes up to 120. And so the or is absolutely essential. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Go ahead, Mia.
Great, thanks, Brendan. I want to just add around the income limits. So if what you're saying is true, Alyssa, and you're thinking about the 30 hours a week working somewhere without an income level, you could be providing housing for someone earning, let's just say, $500,000 a year, right? Because they're working 30 hours a week as the assistant general manager of the ski resort. So how do you differentiate need from that perspective? I think the other challenge too, again, going back to compliance, is especially if it's applying to purchase. If these are homes that are built, let's say a developer speculates, and if it's just 30 hours a week, that means it's an unfettered market price, right? There's nothing dictating the price of that home under the attainable, with the exception of whoever lives there has to qualify by 30 hours a week. What if they qualify and then in a year they change jobs and we're still in the pandemic and they're Zooming their job, every day they're working down in LA or doing whatever, right? How does one then, do you force them to sell the house if they purchased it? So I think you run into some challenges around also fair housing. So if this is considered somewhat of a subsidy or a program, it has to be equal opportunity, and so how then do you differentiate need? Because it's really let's just say, for the example, the for sale, because really, John is right. The rental market can serve, frankly, 100% and below. 100% is what we're finding to be the average AMI of the current rents today. Market rents are about 100% of AMI. So in other words, 80% of AMI or below is sort of your affordable rents. And then from a for sale standpoint, the nice thing about the 220 is it's set at a much higher price. So say, for example, you could sell a home for $725,000 and still sort of make that 220 price point work because it's a large family household. So, but if you don't have a limit or a cap, then you can be building 5,000 square foot mansions selling for $1.5 million to someone working 30 hours a week in Tahoe. So I think those are, we have to kind of find ways to make sure that there's not that unintended consequence, that now people are getting free residential units of use to build these big, beautiful homes, and it's unfettered because whoever the developer is who builds it, they're not going to be the ones who are complying who are certifying that the person living there is going to be, working 30 hours a week for the next 30 years. It's the person who owns the house who's going to probably make that self-certification. So it's just, you just run into it. It's hard to make that compliance piece work. And I think you're also potentially missing the mark when it comes to, because the greatest need is your working workforce earning essentially 100% of median or less. That's where the biggest bulk of your workforce need is, because those are the folks that are coming in around the tourist economy. Those are the ones that, that are choosing Tahoe as a lifestyle, but they can't afford to, live anywhere, because they're the ones that are the individuals. As you said earlier, Alyssa, it's 1 and 2 bedrooms is your greatest demand. But the problem is if you set up sort of the achievable units to be, again, any size, right? So they can be 5,000 square feet. And remember how expensive it is. So we're not, even though you can do 2 units, you're still going to do 1 unit because it's a lot cheaper to do that. And you're going to sell it to the highest bidder. So we're not incentivizing smaller unit production. We're not incentivizing deed restricted units to really target the missing middle, that missing workforce housing that does not exist. So we just don't want to turn this into someone's ability just to build a lot of high-end homes, because now they have a free residential unit of use and all they have to do is say someone's working in Tahoe to qualify. Just saying.
Thanks, Mia.
If I could just respond to that a little bit. So I do want to note that, again, the affordable and moderate income categories would not be changing. So they would still be income-based. Affordable would be up to 80% of the AMI, and moderate would be up to 120% of the AMI. And then just another quick note is that if someone is getting a bonus unit, their home will be deed restricted, which will impact the market value of the home. So likely if someone is building $1 million home, they're not going to deed restrict their home in exchange for a bonus unit that on the open market is about $30,000. The chances of that are probably pretty low. And so the likelihood of someone buying $1 million home who's working in Tahoe is probably pretty low, but I understand where you're coming from, Mia, and that if we're not looking at the incomes, that could be problematic.
Thanks, Alyssa. Let's go to Chase, and then I think we should probably move on to our next topic. Go ahead, Chase.
Yeah, a couple of clarifying questions. So to someone else's comment earlier, if that or was changed to and, wouldn't that then address the problems that people are bringing up, with the exception of annual compliance monitoring? I think that's a different animal. And then secondly, when you're saying achievable, I've always thought that achievable by TRPA's definitions, like for example, was quite a bit more than 120. On the South Shore, it was 160. In incline, I think it was 195, something like that. So are we talking about, so would this in essence also drop that achievable AMI?
As we've proposed it today, it would get rid of that achievable income AMI level and just rely on that location-based eligibility working within this boundary. There's a potential that we could do we could have an income limit and this employment location-based eligibility requirement as well. But I think that it still brings up the question mark of, like in incline, Chase, it's actually the achievable income limits in incline for a single family home subsidize a household that's making up to $330,000 a year, which is, much higher than what needs to be subsidized. So that's really the problem that we were hoping to solve with this location-based eligibility.
Good, Chase?
Yes, thank you.
Cool. All right, how about Emily? And then let's move to our next subject.
Thank you. Just to clarify, Alyssa, you said that would remove the achievable. Is that removing the achievable
all for TRPA or just for this program? Just for these bonus units?
It would be removing the achievable, I guess I don't, can you clarify? Because aren't they kind of the same?
It's only tied to bonus units. I don't think we have achievable anywhere else that's not related to bonus units, unless I'm.
So that would be a little problematic for Placer County. We would just have to we have based our workforce housing preservation program off of TRPA's achievable income limits. I know that going with employer-based only is more like the Vail model. There may still be some merit to imposing that achievable income limit along with the employment requirement. So I would suggest considering that.
Would people be okay, and maybe you could like do the thumbs up or something on your screen and we could flip through it to see like if we do just keep the achievable limits, even though as Alyssa mentioned, they're pretty high, but so there would be the achievable limit. So instead of saying up to 120% AMI, it would say up to the achievable limit or work. So let's see, no, up to the achievable limit. Sorry, it would be up to 120% AMI or up to the achievable limit and work 30 hours or more for an employer who has an address in this boundary. So keep those achievable limits, but if you're in the achievable category, you also have to have a workforce category, or you also have to have a workforce, you have to be a local worker.
I see one now and one thumbs up. Let's see.
Maybe it's something we all kind of go back to the drawing board and discuss a little bit more, just to make sure it's kind of take a closer look and get back to you. Is that possible?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to have to think. I think we almost, if we do both of them, Washoe County's achievable limit is so high, like Alyssa just said, it's almost absurd. I mean, I appreciate you trying to do something for us to make something possible, but it's such a high number. I think that by going both, by saying that high number is allowed in incline and the 30+ hours, we're just creating the scenario that Mia suggested of some executive making really good money in an incline village in a nice, big, beautiful house that got all the free stuff that we offer them because they meet these requirements. I'm not sure. I think we might have those very unintended consequences that Mia was talking about if we do that in Washoe. I'm not sure. I have to think about it. Sorry.
Let's see, John, do you have a quick comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to, again, reiterate and kind of reinforce the concept. I don't mind if you want to keep it at 120 as an option, fine. But if it's anything other than or, if it includes a shall or an and, then because a deed restriction is such a powerful disincentive to accruing any equity in the home because it reduces the resale potential pool significantly. So it seems to me that in and of itself is a sufficient disincentive to keep the McMansion person who owns 15 restaurants in the region from participating in the bonus pool program under this third and final tiny part of the whole program. I think that if you just have the deed restriction, that alone is going to ensure that you have good faith players who really work in this basin and are invested in this community.
I think the problem is that TRPA is trying to address this concern that we're not doing enough to create housing for local workforce. So this was their attempt at doing that, at helping with that issue. And I feel for them with that, you know, because that is what everyone's saying and demanding. So maybe there's ways we can go to the drawing board and kind of put forth some, you know, assistance, some help, some ideas for them if this causes inadvertent problems like that, you know.
Okay, it's a good discussion. Karen, Alyssa, you think you're good here? Do you want to move? We still have a few more to go, so I want to, it's already afternoon. Do you want to move on, or do you want to keep going on this one?
I think we can move on.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay, so in the last couple of slides here, we just wanted to talk about next steps and where we are with the timeline. So this was the set of priority actions that the working group recommended and the governing board approved. The local government housing committee and the governing board approved. So, but as you can see, we've already started to tackle some of the longer term issues in the near term. So like we're already looking at tourist conversion in the near term set, and we're starting to look a little bit at like mixed use as part of that density discussion. So because we've accelerated some items, we just kind of wanted to present a slight reorganization to let you know what we're now considering near term, medium term, and longer term. And it still keeps all these same items, but basically just recognizes that we've accelerated our timeline a little bit. So if you could go to the next slide. So phase one, that's where we are now, and we'll be moving this package forward to the governing board. And I'll talk about that in a minute. So in that package, we're looking at ADUs and a piece of density that's that tourist conversions, allowing the non-conforming tourist densities to convert to residential density. So we're looking here at ADUs and tourist conversions in this near term. Then as we move into the medium term, as Alyssa described, we will still be looking at some of these other categories, mixed use residential, which was in the medium term, multifamily residential, that's kind of that residential density. And then as part of the site constraints discussion, we may be able to look at, you know, we're thinking that we would look at that coverage action item here in the medium term instead of leaving it for the longer term. And there may be a few things we can look at related to height. And then going into the longer term, we would look at permitting parity, which was, I think, a medium term item before, but we think now that will fit in the long term, along with fees and land donations. And then, you know, as we had heard from you guys, there's some other incentives that we still want to look at. We could look at potentially if there's possibility for additional incentives in this longer term phase. So we're starting to wrap up the near term phase and move into the medium term phase now. And we, so that medium term phase will probably begin in the summer, at a July meeting. And we know the summer is a little bit hard to find times for, so I'm going to send out a doodle poll to get people's input on what the next good time for a meeting would be. So now if we could go to the last, I don't know, that maybe at the end we can see if there's any final comments. I don't know if we really need like input on that. So then the final next steps are, so we need to now put together the environmental analysis for the basic package that we presented. If possible, we will start bringing it to the governing board committees for a recommendation in May. But we may need to push it out a month, but we're going to start working on that right now. So ideally we would bring it forward in May, possibly bring it to the governing board in June or maybe in July. So we need to look at schedules and the timing of getting the environmental analysis done. And I guess we'll just keep working on this workforce local residents definition. So we probably won't be bringing that forward just yet. So yeah, and if anybody has any final questions or comments about that, the timeline or the process, would be happy to hear this.
Does anyone have any feedback on timeline or that the mid, long-term, near-term priorities?
This is Mia. I just had a question of what's your thoughts then on on the midterm then? Is that a couple, would that, if you started in the summer, would you complete by the end of the year, or is that a year process? What do you imagine, Karen?
I think we need to wait and see. I think we might want to give ourselves a year because I think those are a little bit more complicated of issues and may need more environmental analysis. Like we want to make sure that we can really, like this package that we put forward really kind of fit so far. We've, you know, at first look, it appears to fit within the environmental analysis of the 2012 regional plan. We need to make sure that's the case. But these other changes that we're looking at have bigger environmental implications. So we want to make sure that we have the time to do that analysis and really, you know, think through all of that. So if it moves faster than that, potentially we could, you know, we're planning to try to bring you a little bit more specific recommendations at the next meeting so we can get your feedback on that. If there seems like there's some obvious consensus items that we can start moving forward, that's fine. But if we need more time, we would take a little longer on that. So potentially up to a year, maybe 6 months to a year. But I think we would already start on the long-term phase, maybe by the end of the year or at the beginning of next year.
Great, thanks for that clarity.
Anyone else have any final thoughts, I guess, really on anything that we talked about today?
Okay, one more final thought. I didn't quite get it in during the density discussion, but so what really intrigued me, frankly, is TRPA's creativity around the TAUs and recognizing that TAUs are smaller and that residential units of use are a larger equivalency. So again, just going back to the ADU discussion before you close the door on that, could there be something similar applied to the ADU? Again, going back to the possibility of trying to make sure that ADUs could potentially fit inside, you know, areas that have a smaller primary home, you know, just again, it's just, I can just imagine you get to that equity bit when it's free. And if you have a small home and you're grandfathered in by right to be able to build a little bit larger because your average footprint is so much greater than what your existing home is, I just feel like that is something that could be explored and potentially, you know, the environmental justification might be there because of the, you know, equivalencies that you've presented in the ADU, in the TAU residential units of use equivalency that could be applied in some methodology similar to that for the ADU. So again, you can get at those ADUs a lot quicker without using bonus units or you find a way to get those bonus units kind of divvied up so that there's an equity part of it. So it isn't just one size fits all. I just think at this point, you've got such a small commodity of these left. To grow the pool would be great. Any one of those things, because I think, you know, because if it works, I think your ADU program will probably take off, especially if you can put houses on wheels and you get RENA credits for it. So if you anticipate that kind of demand, I hope that there's a consideration of equivalency.
I think that equity piece is really important to make sure that we're not inadvertently just incentivizing the larger units, which is what we're trying to get at with Alyssa's density piece. But I think looking at it, seeing if there's an application to ADUs could be useful.
It's this is John, when we look at the fees, we have to have, and the impact, we have to have a nexus. When we were able to do the conversion between TAUs and multifamily and single family and all that, we were able to use similar VMT data to justify those ratios. So I'm not saying we can or can't do it, Mia, but we'll have to find some rationale for if we have different sizes or something like that. But we could certainly look at it. If you have some information on relative impacts of one versus the other, that would be helpful.
I would be happy to brainstorm with you. You know, again, ADUs are not exactly my, you know, what I build, but I think it is absolutely part of the housing solution and absolutely part of the equity solution. So I just, I'm happy to participate in conversations and maybe we can get some resources to the table that could help us think about this differently.
Thanks, Mia. Does anyone else have any final thoughts? Anyone that hasn't spoken up yet?
And I just want to acknowledge we got some comments in the chat and we've seen those and we can get, there's some good input there. Thank you. And we can get back to people on that too.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Karen, Alyssa, John, are you feeling good? Are we ready to adjourn?
Yeah.
I want to thank the group for continuing to be engaged in these long meetings and what a lot of people consider the weeds, but I think we really are going to make some good changes because of all your participation. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
Thank you. Yeah, Karen's, I guess, is going to follow up with a doodle poll so we can schedule our next meeting in the summer sometime. Yeah. And I'm sure Karen will inform the group if there's any codes going to future boards or anything at TRPA for approval that the group needs to know about.
Yeah, we'll keep you posted on that.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, everyone. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the beautiful Tahoe day.
Yeah, thanks
for all your leadership, you guys, and all your hard work. Appreciate it.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.